today we have Philip Arcole and Anthony Ferreras. Philip is CEO at WorkLitis, and Anthony, you are at Pinterest, and I forgot your title, but Director of People Analytics and lots of other cool stuff. It's on my paper, but I'm not going to look at it. And so they're going to really talk to us about some tools, especially around organizational network analysis, and how insights from that can really help managers better understand productivity, team dynamics, and also share with us some real-world examples and strategies to help leaders kind of navigate this world of kind of distributed work. So without further ado, Philip and Anthony.
Is this the clicker here?
That's the clicker.
I think so. You want to take it around?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, let me just set the scene. I think Anthony's going to start with a bit of his experience at Pinterest. I think they have.
I cannot speak about Pinterest.
Yeah, but they have a lot of experience in his time there, experience with their distributed work program, and he's thought a lot about this challenge and how to create distributed environments for managers and better support those managers. And then I'll jump into some examples of the type of work that we do in this space.
Yeah. For the recording, I cannot speak specifically about Pinterest, but I can talk about broadly my experience in this area. But I am really excited about talk about this topic. Distributed workforce is such an important topic for me as a professional, for the companies that I've worked for, and specifically for me personally, which I'll share a little bit of a personal story there as well. But I think it's such an important topic because what we've seen in the data is that it can lead to some great positive things. Not only things like it could potentially even lower cost in some particular cases, but other things as well, increase motivation, and lots of things like that. Increase diversity. We've definitely seen a lot of that as well. And you get to find, all the top talent from across different areas. But it does mean that we have to manage a little bit differently, lead a little bit differently. And it all comes down to, how do we measure this too? How do we understand better how we're doing with our distributed workforce? I'm not going to talk specifically, go through the whole history of how we've gotten to the point where we're talking about strategies around distributed work, remote work, work from home, hybrid, all those sorts of things. It's recent history. You all have experienced it. I experienced it. But it led us to a point where while COVID was an incredibly terrible thing for many reasons, the positive thing that it led to is forced companies to innovate around how we work, when we work, who do we work with, when we work, all those great things. The personal story that I'll have, and I know we only have 20 minutes, so stop me if it goes too long, is, we're originally from the LA, Los Angeles area in California. And my wife and I moved to the Pacific Northwest, which we absolutely love. We love Seattle. And we had our fun there. It was a great experience. And then to top it all off, the cherry on top was at the end of 2019, we had Julian Anthony Ferreras, our son. He's now 5 years old. And from that day, I took parental leave. And from that day, he has seen me every single day to this day, except when Barry asked me to come present at a conference, of course. But that's a whole other thing. But he has seen me every single day. I grew up in a traditional Hispanic family where my mother was the superhero of the family, did everything at home, kept us safe, fed us, all those things. She's my hero. My dad worked very long hours for us. And I honestly, to the day he died, I don't think I really knew him because of that, but I appreciate what he did for me. But what an incredible experience for me to be there for my son every single day. If I want to take a break in the middle of the day, so as you can tell, I'm basically remote. I work from home. If I want to take a break in the middle of the day when he comes home from kindergarten, I can go give him a hug. If I want to take a break and go pick him up from kindergarten, I can do that, right? It's an incredible, I think, It's an incredible opportunity to help increase motivation and engagement. I'm definitely much more motivated in this setup to work hard for my company. Sorry if that was too long.
That was great.
But it does mean, like I said, it does mean that we have to lead a little bit differently, and we have to measure those things. We have to understand that. We, or in my experience, we've used surveys to try to understand like how people are engaged across different areas. You know, some of the considerations that we must make is how do we continue to develop and grow our talent, no matter where they are, not just in front of your face, whoever's in front of your face, but somewhere else. In order to create more productivity, what are the things that we do to measure those things, to understand how we're doing them? And that's what we're doing. One of the things that is really important these days in a distributed workforce is how do we support our managers to think about things a little bit differently. I certainly have, though I think that this is a positive for me now that I'm at home all the time with my child. It does force me to be a different type of manager. It does force me to be much more intentional about communicating with with my employees, about engaging with them. You know, there's some things that Phil is going to talk about with regards to how much face time you spend with them. The amount of support that you provide is much more intentional, whereas before it could be ad hoc. And I'll spend a little bit of time here is that I think team size is incredibly important no matter whether you're a distributed workforce or not, but I think because of the intentionality that we have to have now as leaders, it can cause, you know, some challenges with managers. The larger the team, the more burnout potential that a manager has, and the less time that our employees might have with us, which is such an important piece to that puzzle of the distribution. So there's a lot of considerations here. And then ultimately what we have to take into consideration is how much time in between is enough where we need to bring the teams together. We've seen data, we've seen evidence showing that the longer you go, the more retention risk there is, the less connection that employees have or they feel with their coworkers, with their manager, with the culture of the company. This is very different, I think, across different jobs and roles, but that's something that we need data for. Ultimately, we do gather, like I mentioned before, we do gather employee voice type of data to try to understand when we need to act or how we need to act, or even just to understand. But that's one piece of the puzzle. There's a kind of a broader set of opportunities with data that I think Phil is going to take you through, which I think is really important.
Great, thanks, Tony. That was a great personal example. I appreciated that. So we're a workplace insights company. We do a lot of work helping organizations understand ways of work and how they've been changing over the past few years. In the last 5 minutes, I'm going to share a few of the anecdotes that we've seen, particularly as they pertain to distributed teams and managers, to give you a flavor for what we're seeing in sort of general trends in the organization and how you might better support managers in your organizations. Just as a quick overview of what Workplace Insights does, or what it is it's analyzing all of the signals across the typical tools that people use to get work done in organizations, combining that with information about presence, whether people are physically in the office, whether they're remote or distributed, sentiment data, lifecycle data, combining that all in one set to better understand what the day-to-day employee experience is like inside of organizations. So the first question, which I think many people will know the obvious answer to, is how important are managers in a distributed work environment? Do they make that much of a difference? And I think many of you will have guessed the answer is yes. So we're often asked by CEOs or leaders in organizations about quiet quitting. It's one of the top concerns for many executives when it comes to more distributed teams and remote organizations. And so we've studied anonymously across across a number of organizations. Whether this really happens or not, this severe form of disengagement, turns out in a small number of cases, a small percentage, it does. And what is the top predictor of whether you're going to see that? It looks like in most cases, it's the amount of attention and the relationship that you have with your manager, just as manager satisfaction is. In fact, the more time you spend with your manager, the less likely you are to suffer from this severe form of disengagement. And when we see quiet quitting, it's normally managers aren't having regular one-on-ones, they're not co-attending meetings with the people on their teams, and there's limited proactive outreach. They're waiting for their team to come back to them to connect. They're not checking in. They're not checking in on people. So that's it was a particularly interesting finding over the last couple of years. Tony mentioned understanding how important FaceTime is. When you're in a distributed team, you're often not seeing your manager for many months. How often should you be seeing your manager? What is the right cadence? In many organizations, travel budgets are limited, so you can only see your teams a couple of times a year. And we've looked into data that suggests what a relevant frequency should be. First of all, I would say that we see huge variance in organizations around how often people see their managers. Some people only see their managers once a year, once every year and a half, and others are seeing their manager once a month and every couple of days. And organizations aren't really thinking about across their organization in which sorts of buckets people are and where those issues might be. Turns out that at a certain point, a lack of FaceTime with your manager starts to influence your relationship with your manager and your feedback about how supported you feel by that manager. And we've looked at this in a number of organizations and found that there tends to be a sweet spot. It looks like around the 4 or 5 month mark. If you go longer than that without seeing your manager, you start to see more disconnection. You start to see less satisfaction with that relationship. So that's a good guide on how often, if you're thinking about having people travel to see their manager, you should be doing that. So we know that manager attention is important. We know that FaceTime at some level matters. What is one of the things that most influences how much attention a manager can give to their team? And that's employee span, how big their team is. The larger your team is, the more people you have reporting to you, the harder it is to give attention to each person on that team. And distributed work requires more time, you have to be more proactive, you have to plan the outreach, you have to have more regular one-on-ones, and so the problem is even more pervasive. And so we see time and time again, the larger the team, the less one-on-one time, the less co-attendance of meetings, the less check-ins managers are doing with all of their teams. And we've looked at this data in detail and found that there are sweet spots around 7 or 8 person teams. Once you get over that sort of size, it's very difficult for a manager to stay in touch and to keep connected with their team. And on the flip side of that, when teams are too small, you suffer from other issues, potentially micromanagement. Particularly interesting and important finding, given that a lot of organizations are thinking right now about spans of control, delayering in the name of driving efficiency. So if you're creating huge teams, but your teams are distributed, you're likely going to have issues with engagements on your teams. So these are some examples of the types of insights that workplace analytics can deliver around what manager relationships are like and how to better support those managers. We're delivering these insights at various different levels. It used to be that a lot of this type of data would go to executives inside of organizations, but more and more we're seeing customers send insights directly to managers and even down to individual employees to better guide them on how they compare to other managers across the organization and the industry and what they can do to directly impact and improve the way they're managing their distributed teams. And that's a wrap. I'd love to leave 5 minutes for any questions that people have for either Tony or me. Tony, thanks again for joining me today. Anything we can help to answer. Or otherwise, afterwards, would love to chat if you're interested in learning more.
Any questions?
Sure. It didn't go bust.
Okay.
Yes, I love the manager, scoring and the correlation. I assume it's a correlation with time spent with manager. Is it possible that you have any more detail on that? Because I guess I'm wondering how universal that is. Because I just there are always those exceptions, right? Generally, more time spent is probably a good thing, but then you have managers who are either in an impossible situation, and so when they interact with their employees, they have to hand off impossible workloads, so they're all set up to fail. Or just ogre managers who are just plain difficult. So in that case, which by the way, in my prior life I've had those.
Yeah.
I actually did much better when I didn't have any interaction with my manager.
Yeah.
So I wondered what kind of sort of sub story or sub cases, or is it predominantly just time spent? Because that does seem a little, I guess, simplistic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's as much as I could have showed in the 5 minutes that we had here. But you're right. I mean, I think layering in the context of the type of team that the manager is leading. Is it a more junior team that requires more attention? Is it a more senior team? What is the type of work that they're doing? Is the manager just a manager, or are they a player in the team as well? So are they engineer and also writing code? What accounts for their time? So there's a lot of other context. And that changes significantly what the right threshold is. Differs from organization to organization, and layering that sort of human and day-to-day context is really important in ultimately deciding what sorts of recommendations and nudges you provide in organizations, for sure.
Philip, I think when you're referring to teams, you're talking about kind of hierarchical, like I report into, or these are the people that report to me, not necessarily cross-functional teams or project teams. This is really about that true manager-employee kind of relationship.
Correct. I think that particularly in this case, that's what we're looking at. But I would venture to guess that you may see similar types of effects in project teams as well, if they're important members of those teams that are less accessible, or that you see less often. You're likely to see some of these types of issues, although the
team leader or the practice lead or whatever.
Yeah, but the nature of the relationship is obviously different.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I had a question on productivity, right? You spoke about the quiet quitting. How did you guys measure the quiet quitting? Did you measure the productivity of the company?
Yeah, so measuring productivity directly is notoriously very difficult to do because productivity is not just how active somebody is. You could be sending 1,000 emails and they're all junk, or one really valuable one that adds value. You're missing sort of a quality element, a business value element to the type of the work. What we're looking for is essentially a number of signals that give us a sense of whether people have fundamentally changed how connected they are in the organization, how much they're getting done, how active they are in general. So it's not exactly productivity. It is relative to 6 months ago, after being remote for 6 to 12 month period, are they still connected to as many people and working in more or less the same way, or have they become really detached? They used to work with 50 people and now they're working with 1 or 2. They're a lot less active. They're contributing to fewer projects on a day-to-day basis. And these are also predictors, by the way, for attrition in many cases. And those people often end up attriting over the long term. So it's a severe form of really becoming disconnected from the organization and detaching. And it's relatively rare, I will say. Yeah.
Hi. So I think you shared something showing, on average, if it was like 4 months plus or something, that you hadn't seen your manager in person, that had impacts on engagement. So I was wondering, have you looked at also just the effect also of just virtual meetings and one-on-ones? Like, could that mitigate that in some way? Like, let's say you don't have the travel budget for every quarter because you have, 5 people on your team that are all distributed, and maybe you can only get together in person twice a year. Like, is there any, look at, again, like effects of at least weekly you have a virtual meeting or something like that hopefully still keeps that impact?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think just in general, related to some of the other findings we showed, when you have fewer virtual meetings, when you have less virtual connection, when your manager co-attends meetings less with you, when you have fewer virtual one-on-ones, when the camera is not on, for example, on a Zoom call, or those sort of micro signals and things that allow you to get closer and feel like you have a closer relationship to your manager, do in general impact outcomes when they relate to managers. And we haven't directly looked at your question, but I would guess that those are great ways to mitigate that effect and to lengthen that window. Yeah.
I'm also curious if the context of the meeting matters. Like when you're meeting a manager, does it matter what exactly you're discussing, or is it just getting the FaceTime in? That's what drives the result.
Yeah, great question. I think that both matter. So I think, and in fact, having your manager involved in work also matters. So we, for instance, look at software development teams, and when you can see managers commenting on GitHub pull requests and getting involved in the actual workflow, that also has a positive effect. But we've seen, for example, a big difference between sort of informal one-on-ones and formal one-on-ones, as an example. So if you have a one-on-one scheduled in your calendar, and the title is, one-on-one with my team report, that having enough of those or having that frequently is one of the strongest predictors of a healthy manager relationship. Even if managers say, I have meetings with my team, if it's not formalized like that, they tend to be discussions about work issues or the latest blocker that's preventing me from doing my work. Whereas if you have a scheduled one-on-one, some of that stuff still creeps in, obviously, but you're more likely to have career, well-being, checking in, how are you doing, because there's space carved out for you to do that. So I think it really matters, ultimately.
Do we have time for one more question?
I think we're actually over, so... Yeah, I think we actually need to stop, so I apologize. But I know you'll be available to answer those questions. So I'm sorry, who asked that question? Yeah, we will make sure that you get connected so you can get your question answered. So thank you.
We have a booth over there if anybody has any other questions.
Yeah, they have a booth as well. Yes, thank you. All right, thank you very much. Please give a hand.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.